Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hi. How is everybody doing?
Great.
Great.
Hi there.
Hi. Just had to push the right buttons.
There was a shooting at a shopping plaza last night in BC. Gang fun. Just breaking news.
Chapter.
Wasn't there something at the airport?
Yes. Gang. I guess it's called gang stuff.
Just give everybody a couple of minutes to join. We've got a good crowd already, so I think we could probably start soon, but we'll just give it a minute.
Just plugging in.
Understood.
Okay. Okay, maybe we can get started here. So I just want to welcome everybody to our, oh, 1 second. I'm just gonna, can I just ask everybody to mute themselves for a minute here? Thank you. Okay, so I just want to welcome everybody to our Winsor & Newton watercolor demo. We have Kristen Brown here. Very excited to have her. I don't know if some of you guys saw her in the oil painting demo we had a few weeks ago, but she's back with us. So again, I know a lot of you are familiar with how we do our demos, but throughout the demo, if you have any questions, please just write them in the chat. When Kristen has some downtime, we will ask her on your behalf. And then near the end, we're going to run a little Q&A, and you can ask Kristen questions directly or in the chat, however you like. So we're going to send it over to Kristen and we can get started.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. So I'm Kristen, and I'm an artist for the Fine Art Collective. And the Fine Art Collective is the education program for Winsor Newton and Liquitex. And I'm also an artist based in San Francisco as well. And I'm also a retail activation specialist for Cool Art, which is also Winsor Newton and Liquitex. Yeah, so I'm also originally from Canada. So yay, Canada. So Saskatchewan, so kind of far away from Toronto, but still. So I'm going to do a few different little kind of mini projects, and if you guys have paint, you can paint along, and then this demo will be saved afterwards, so you can always come back to it later if you want to look at it again to try some of these things out. And I'm gonna put in some of my contacts into the chat here, so you can click on the chat icon and those will show up for you there. And then I also have a couple of them right here, but it might be easier to copy and paste from there, or you can screenshot either way, whatever's easier for you. So this one right here is going to be the Instagram for the Fine Art Collective. So that's at TFAC NA. And that's a great place to find other like kind of mini demos that are like acrylic, oil, and watercolor. And then just something about me personally is I use a lot of oil paint, but also watercolor and also some acrylic. So I really like kind of experimenting with all different types of art materials. And if you want to check out some of my work, I'm at Kristen Brown Art, or Kristen_Brown_art. And that's where you're going to find like all my Instagram stuff. So I have some of my own personal artwork And then also more like educational content and you know, that kind of stuff. And then this is the Winsor Newton Instagram. So that's just going to be all Winsor Newton stuff there. So you can give them a follow as well. One thing to keep in mind is the TFAC Instagram has giveaways pretty often. So they actually just did a giveaway on one of the watercolor blocks, similar to the one that I'm going to be using. If you're following them, that's a good way to find out when those giveaways are happening. And then I also put my website into the chat there too. So that's going to be where you see more of my professional work in there as well. And I love seeing what everybody's working on. So if you do end up doing something based on the demo today, tag me and I would love to see what you did. So I'm just going to kind of start off by showing everybody what colors I'm going to be using. The full palette I have is the Winsor Newton recommended palette. So, you know, as everybody knows, like if you've been painting with any kind of paint or watercolor for a long time, you may already have a color palette that you like to use. I know especially for oil painting, for me, I have like a certain set color palette that I really like to stick to. And sometimes I'll add in other colors, but I don't really kind of mess around with it too much. So some people may already have that for watercolor as well. If you're just starting off, this is kind of what Winsor Newton recommends as like a good palette to get a full range of colors just from these 6 colors. So as we know with watercolor, we don't generally use white because when you have white, you're going to be using the white of the paper showing through. There is options for white. And then if you need a more opaque white, you could always use white wash in with that. But traditionally with watercolor, your white is coming from the white of the paper. So for the yellows that they have in the Winsor Newton recommended palette, there's going to be Winsor Lemon. So that one is going to be kind of more like your bright kind of lemony yellow kind of color. And then we want sort of more of a slightly orangier yellow color. So we would call this one your warm yellow and this one your cool yellow. And for anybody that isn't familiar with warm and cool colors, the ones that are a little bit closer. So if we look at this yellow and we can see that's a little bit closer to orange. And orange would be a warmer color. So because it's closer to red. So we would call that one the warm yellow. The lemon yellow is a little bit closer to green. So that would mean that it's getting closer to blue. So we would call that a cool yellow. So it's good to have a balance of both of those, because then if you're mixing like an orange or a more orangey color, then it would make sense to use the more orangey yellow. If you were mixing more kind of greenish colors, then it would make sense to make it with the lemon yellow, because that's going to give you a brighter green. And then you could kind of get into like, if you want a dull green, then maybe you would actually use the other one, because then it's going to give you a more kind of like slightly kind of more muted green, because it'll be closer to being an opposite color. So then for the reds here, I have Permanent Rose. So Permanent Rose is going to be like this really kind of like nice pinky kind of color. This one is also like a very transparent color. And so this is going to be great for making like really nice, like bright purples and all that. So then that's going to be what we would consider the cool red that we're using. And so, and this is kind of where it gets a little bit confusing, because it's like, why is pink like a cool color? Because it's red, so it would be a warm color. But just in comparison to these two, if we have like this one is Scarlet Lake. So this one is like kind of like almost orangey colored, like almost like the same color as my nails, right? So kind of like more of an orangey red color. So then we would call this one the warm color, because this one is a little bit closer to blue, better for making purple. That's going to be the cool red color that we have. So then for the blues, we'll have the French Ultramarine and then the Winsor Blue Green shade. And so same thing there. We have one blue that's going to be closer to green, better for making greens, and then one blue that's closer to purple, so better for making purples. And then, so you don't necessarily have to buy 6 colors all at once. So this is an example of just using 3 colors as your primary color. So if you were just really kind of wanting to try out watercolor just to kind of see if you like it or not, this is a suggested primary set with just using 3 colors. So again, I'm going to use the Winsor Lemon as the main yellow color. Permanent Rose is the main red color. But one thing you'll see, and you don't necessarily see it super well when I'm mixing together the red and the yellow, but they do actually kind of, if you mix like the Winsor Lemon and the Permanent Rose, you can get kind of a nice like orangey red color by mixing those 2 together. Winsor Blue red shade. So in the 6 color one, I would recommend the green shade, but then there's also going to be a blue shade or a red shade, which is going to be better for mixing your purples in this case if you just have 3 colors, if that makes sense. So in the 3 color, I would go like still Winsor Blue, which for anybody that isn't familiar with the name Winsor Blue, it's actually the same as phthalo blue. So if you have phthalo blue and any other types of paint, it's the same thing. If we looked at the back of the tube, it would say PV15, which is the same indexing number as phthalo blue and other colors. But you can get it in either red shade or blue shade. So depending on whether you have the 6 colors or the 3 colors, I would do green shade for 6 colors and red shade for 3 colors. So hopefully that makes sense there. And then, has anybody used masking fluid before? You can just type in the chat if you're familiar with using it at all. And then why don't I, at the end, I can type in the colors that I used. You can just remind me of that question if you missed a few of them. And as I go along, I'll reiterate which colors I'm using, but I can also just type them in there. Oh, great. So like a lot of people have used masking fluid. Awesome. So I'm going to be using the colorless masking fluid from Winsor Newton. And then I'm also going to be doing a little bit of masking with gum arabic. So this one, I actually didn't know that you could use it to mask out areas until like fairly recently. So this one might be kind of more new to some people for masking. And I think a lot of people haven't really used gum arabic too much. So there's other purposes, like it's really great for like layering and glazing and getting a little bit of gloss on your painting as well. So I'm going to be using a little bit of both of those. So this one is just kind of a sample of the, for anybody that's not familiar with masking fluid or hasn't used it before, essentially what masking fluid is going to do is going to block out and keep the white of the paper. And I'll take you through the steps of like how to use that. And then here, I'll just kind of show a couple examples of ways you can use masking fluid, and then I'll take you through the steps of using it in a couple different places. So this would be an example of using it in maybe a slightly more realistic sense. So I used it to block out the whites in the leaves in here. So I would have done that before I started painting anything else. And then on these two, I used it to block out a pattern on these pots. So even after blocking it out, I could go back in and color, that a different color too. So you can always just kind of use it to get a nice crisp blocked out edge, and then you can always go back to it after with another color. So actually, even in here, I went in and did a little bit of layering over top to make that area look more shaded in that spot, and then left it more white on the lighter side. And then this one here. So basically all of these would have been outlined with the masking fluid first. And then I did a wet into the crystals. So that would be another example of it. And then when you pull off the masking fluid, then it has no border at all anymore, because all of that this would have been like a white line all the way around the outside. And so since the white of the paper was kept there, then you actually don't even see an outline at all. And if you, I don't think I'm going to be sketching anything out with pencil, but I've noticed that like if you do sketch out what you're drawing with a pencil first, when you remove the masking fluid, generally it's going to pick up the pencil lines you did as well. So you won't have to erase them after, which is really convenient. And then over here, this is a drawing just done with like a liner pen. And then the masking fluid was used to block out the moon and the stars. And then I just painted the moon in yellow afterward. But those little dots were done with masking fluid. And then the one I'm going to take everybody through, it's a pretty quick project. So I'll take you through this project really quickly and then move on to a couple other different techniques. But is this one here. So the lines were done with the masking fluid. Then there's a wet into wet technique, which I'll show everyone. And then once it dries, you can remove the masking fluid and you'll get the lines like this. So this one also, I was using a little bit of liner afterward. That's, optional, up to you. And then, as we're going along with the steps of this one, if you kind of want to change it up a little bit, you can totally do that. Or if you want to just follow exactly what I'm doing, you can also do that. And you can choose, you don't have to choose these colors. I just liked these colors because they were kind of like Northern Lights sort of colors. But you can do different color combinations as well. Which liner pen did I use? I'm using a Winsor Newton one. I wonder if I have it around here. It's just like this. So, I think there's a lot of different types of these sort of pens. But that's the one that I used. Just whatever liner pen you're using, if you're doing it over top, don't worry about it being bleed proof. But if you're watercoloring over top of a liner pen, you want to make sure that it's waterproof and doesn't bleed. And then this is like a version that my husband did. So he picked different colors, and he doesn't have like a lot of art experience, but just to kind of give you an example of like a different way of doing it, and a different thickness of the masking fluid line. Yeah, you can use masking fluid with acrylic as well. And actually, Liquitex is coming out with a masking fluid too. I think I have it here. Oh yeah, so this is what I don't know if it's out yet, but Liquitex is going to have a masking fluid soon. And then you can use that on canvas or on paper with acrylic. But you could use even your watercolor masking fluid with acrylic and it would work okay. Cool. So then this one here is just an example of masking with masking fluid versus with gum arabic. And I'll kind of take everybody through the first steps of that one project. And then I'm going to come back while that one's drying. I'm going to actually show you how to mask with gum arabic versus masking fluid. The main difference is masking fluid is going to give you that really hard, crisp edge. But gum arabic is really special in the way that it gives you a really soft masked area. So a little bit different. But I'll talk more about all the differences between those in a bit. So if you're following along, first thing you can do is just find anything kind of round that you have laying around. So I'm just using a roll of tape. If you had like a cup, you could use that, or a bowl. Or like if you have a medium, like an acrylic medium jar, you could use that. So whatever size you want your circle to be. I'm doing mine a little bit on the small side, just because I want it to fit in my camera view here. And as you guys can probably tell, I have the chat open. So I'm looking at it every once in a while. So as you have questions, I'm able to glance up and just kind of answer them. I may miss some, but we'll come back to them if I miss any. So you want to just kind of sketch out your circle. You can go pretty light. If you went a little bit too dark, like I used like an H pencil to do that, and I think it's still maybe a little bit too dark, so I'm just gonna kind of lighten my my line a little bit, just because I don't really want that edge to show through. If it does a little bit, that's fine. Okay, so I got my circle on there, and then I have a small round brush, so depending on how big your circle is, you can choose the size of your brush, but mine's like a size 0 brush, so pretty little. And the one thing I've done that's like kind of a cool tip, if you're not familiar with it, is putting putting a little bit of dish soap on your brush, and then when you're using the masking fluid, when you wash your brush after, the masking fluid won't totally destroy your brush. So, you know, another thing with using masking fluid is you want to use like, not like your most super fancy, like sable hair, super expensive brush. You want to use kind of like more of a mid-range or cheaper brush. And then you can still protect it by using the dish soap, but masking fluid is generally going to be kind of hard on your brushes. So I put some masking fluid into a little dish here. And I'm just kind of dipping into it. And then I'm going to freehand. I would say just if you feel like you need to draw it out, do that. But I would recommend just freehanding it, because if you make a mistake with masking fluid, just wait for it to dry and rub it off and you can redo it. So I'm going to start, and then the other thing you can do is, because it's like we're doing mountains, or like these stylized mountains, they don't have to be perfect. So, you know, starting at the bottom and working your way up to the top, if they're not in the exact same position, it doesn't really matter, right? So I hope everybody can see that okay. So I'm really flooding the line. Can everybody see that? So I'm getting a pretty thick, so the actual width of the line isn't very thick, but I'm really kind of flooding it with quite a bit of masking fluid, because sometimes if you don't get enough on there and it's too thin, it won't block out the watercolor as much as you want it to. So you want to make sure that you're getting enough on there. And again, like you can do a different line thickness if you want. You don't have to do really skinny lines. So after that one, then we'll find whichever mountain comes back next. So this one would be the next in order there. So I'm putting quite a bit on and then just like letting it flow and then re-dipping for each mountain. So this one here, I want to figure out how far up it's going to come. So I know I want it to come from right here. I want it to come, I need to leave room for the moon up there. So I'm just going to make a little dot for where I want the highest point to be, just so I remember. And then I'll come up to that highest point there. And you could make yourself a little mark with a pencil too, that would work. But since I'm going to be putting masking fluid up there anyway, I just made a little dot with actual masking fluid itself. And then this one's going to come all the way down to here. And then at this point, all the other ones are behind. So I'm just going to keep going on this side, and I'm going to put a couple more that just sit behind here. You know, again, feel free to do kind of your own style or own type of pattern. And then for the last mountain, I'm going to have it, because I don't want them all to be the same size and shape. So I'm going to make sure that it's coming up to a higher point. So I'm going to have it come up at a higher point than that. So I just gave myself a little dot there to see where it's coming from there. And I'm going to do a little dot where it's coming from on each side before I draw it, just to make sure it's where I want it to be. So just doing kind of the outline first, and then any details can get added in later. Because basically we want to, like, before adding in any detail, like if one of the mountains looked like it was in kind of a weird spot, you'd want to like know that before you put in all the work and detail into the rest of it. Because it, you know, it's very easy to remove the masking fluid if you feel like you made a mistake or don't really like the way one of them looks. Just once it's not wet anymore, you can just kind of rub it off and try again. So it's very forgiving. So then you can just kind of take a look at how it is. And so I feel okay with where everything is placed. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the details now. If you're at a point where you kind of want to change where something is, you can still move on in the spots where you're liking what it looks like. And then once another part is dry, you could erase it and redo. So basically what we're doing right now is we're just blocking out where we want to keep the white of the paper. And the masking fluid is going to work best for this one because it's going to give us that nice sharp graphic edge. So I'm just also adding in some kind of more stylized lines in here as well. And then the masking fluid is going to take probably, it depends on like what the difference in like the humidity where we are is. Like I'm in California, so it seems like maybe a little bit on the humid side today. So we'll see how long this takes to dry, and it's not very warm right now. So, but I'm thinking probably about 10 minutes we'll be able to paint over it. But it'll kind of depend on the day. Yeah, so you can use, so someone asked if you can use the masking fluid with ink. So actually the demo one that I have here, I did it with acrylic ink. So we'll see, like when I'm doing the watercolor on the one I'm doing now, it'll probably be a little bit lighter because it's not ink. So yeah, you could definitely do this with ink or acrylic ink, and you'll just get like a more intense sort of look. And then, you know, the other thing, if you're using acrylic ink, you'll want to think about is that you won't be able to re-wet the surface. And so it'll be permanent when it's on there. But, you know, just kind of like a main difference between the two. Well, yeah, so someone asked if you can put masking fluid over a color to preserve it, or will it remove it? It kind of depends. I find it sort of depends a little bit on like what color is there. And also like maybe what kind of paper you're using too. So I think the answer is it could remove it, or it could remove some of it. I think certainly if it was like a light color that's easy to lift, probably it would remove it a little bit. If it was like a really staining color, like say you had like Winsor blue, or as we also call it, phthalo blue, and you put masking fluid over it after it was dry to preserve the color and then removed it, it's likely going to still, like it's going to still be there, because that's like a really staining color. But yeah, definitely like just kind of like try it. And worst case scenario, you just fill that color back in again if it lifts it a little bit. You know, the other thing with masking fluid is you generally don't want to leave it on a surface for too long, because depending on what kind of paper you're using, and a lot of other factors, it could get hard to remove if you leave it on there for like months at a time. So generally when you're using it, you'll want to kind of like put it on, and then once you've done the next section, take it off. So don't let it sit on your paper for a long period of time. You know, that being said, you might have no issues taking it off again, and you might be like, oh, I had masking fluid on the paper for like a year and it still came off okay, but I think to be on the safe side, take it off as soon as you can. Yeah, and someone also said like they find, I think what you're saying is you find that the masking fluid can stain if you leave it on too long. I could see that, you know, this one, the one I have is colorless, but there's some that have kind of a yellow tone to them. So I could definitely see that if you leave it on the surface too long, it may, it certainly might stain. Does it come off heavier paper easier? So actually it has less to do with like the amount of like poundage of the paper and more like how the paper is sized. So if paper is sized all the way through, it should be easier to take off. I find sometimes on like more inexpensive paper, it can be, if you leave it on, it can be a little bit harder to take off. But certainly if you have like a professional grade paper, you shouldn't have an issue. I hope that answers that question. But generally, if you're buying a paper that's 300 pounds, it's probably going to be a really good professional grade paper. So I'm just going to put a couple more details on here, and then I'm going to set this to the side and go on to another little project while this one dries. And then when it's dry, we'll come back to this one here. Normally, like, and I would use a blow dryer to like, once I have the lines on here, I would just blow dry it and then go on to the next step once it's dry. You know, with watercolor in general, I use a blow dryer a lot, but because we're like on a live video, we probably don't want everybody like blow drying all the time. But if you're on mute and you have a hair dryer or something around, you could use that to speed up your drying time. But I'm just going to kind of use just work on different things at the same time while I'm waiting for different ones to dry. Oh yeah, and then I think I almost forgot the stars and the moon, so I'll do those too. Okay, so I have all the patterning done on the actual mountain there. And some of it's already starting to dry a little bit, but you don't want to touch it until it's fully dry. Otherwise it'll start to come off too soon. So for the moon, I'm just going to put it over here. You can put it wherever you want. I'm going to do a little like crescent moon, but you could do like a full moon if you want to instead. Or if you want to do it daytime, you could do a sun or something. So put in a little moon there. And then for the stars, you don't want to have too much masking fluid on your brush, and you just want to kind of like take the tip of it and do little tiny dots. When you're doing things like stars or anything that like kind of has like little like dots, one thing to keep in mind is to intentionally vary the size and distance of them. Otherwise they'll just kind of look like polka dots and they won't look as natural. So I'm making sure I have, you know, every once in a while I have like a little bit of a bigger one, and then I'm trying to make the distance of them so some of them are going to be closer together and then some of them are going to be further apart, and then that'll just like make it look more like stars. Or maybe snow. I guess it could be snow, huh? Depending on what you're going for. So I'm just gonna get a few more random ones in there. Making sure I'm getting a few that are like closer to the mountain. And then I'm gonna set that to the side. I'm gonna clean the masking fluid off my brush now. Just so that it doesn't sit on there for an unnecessary amount of time. So we'll come back to this one once the masking fluid is dry. And like I said, that'll likely be about 10 minutes, but we will see. I'm using the Winsor Newton University brush for masking fluid. So this one is kind of like I would probably call it like a mid-range kind of brush. So it's not like one of my fanciest brushes. Because again, like I said, you don't want to use like your nicest, most favorite brush for masking fluid, because like you can see that I use this one like pretty much only for masking fluid. Let me see if I can get it under the camera here. And it's kind of starting to fray a little bit, but it doesn't really matter because it's my masking fluid brush. But that's just because like the masking fluid is a little bit hard on the brushes. So if I'll probably be using some like, sable hair brushes or synthetic sable brushes that are like more expensive. I'm not gonna let those touch the masking fluid. And if I'm using them over top of masking fluid, I want to make sure the masking fluid is really dry first, so that none of it gets on my nice brush. So I'm gonna come over to the gum arabic versus the masking fluid. So I'm gonna do a similar shape with both. So I'm gonna use just the regular masking fluid for contrast. And really you can do whatever I would just try with a basic shape first if it's your first time masking with gum arabic. So you could try doing like a heart, or I'm just doing like a small circle that's not filled in. Maybe I'll do a couple, maybe I'll do another one underneath or something. So that's just with the regular masking fluid. Then I'm going to do the same thing with the gum arabic. So this is liquid gum arabic. And as you guys might know, the binder in the watercolor that we're using, so Winsor Newton Watercolor uses gum arabic as the binder. And gum arabic, it comes from the fir tree. Yeah, so then basically it's, and it's also used like, gum arabic is also used a lot as like a food stabilizer and things too. So just kind of a fun fact there. So I'm just going to put a little bit into one of my trays here, kind of off to the side. And then I'm not going to worry about which brush I'm using for the gum arabic, because that's not going to hurt my brush at all. It's going to be totally fine to put on my brush, because it's also water soluble, and we know that it's also the binder in watercolor, or in Winsor Newton watercolor, that is. So I'm not worried about having it on my brush. So I'm going to try and like mimic that pattern the same way. And one thing we're going to notice is that this one is going to take a little bit longer to dry, to go over top of, because the gum arabic definitely takes longer to dry than the masking fluid. But that's also kind of the benefit of gum arabic in general, is like if you're using it either mixed it, like kind of when you're like using it mixed in with your paint or for glazing on a watercolor, it's kind of nice, or even in a wet into wet, it's gonna make the drying time slower. So you'll have more time to work the surface. So then I'm gonna set that to the side too. So then once that's dry, you can paint over top of it, and then I'll show you the different ways to remove that. Hopefully I didn't go too, like ideally you want to go a little bit thick with it. I'm just like worried that it might not dry, so I might just kind of pull up some of that a little bit. Yeah, I can do that right now, actually. So someone asked, like, because they've never used gum arabic, can you explain like a little bit more about how it's used? And I can do a little demo with using the gum arabic. So with the gum arabic, what you're going to do to remove it, and hopefully I'll be able to show you in the amount of time that we have, but basically you would just take a damp brush and kind of rub the surface like this, and then maybe also kind of pull back with a paper towel, and it'll remove it that way. But you need a slightly, basically the gum arabic is going to be more like a little bit more soluble than the actual color, so it's going to lift easier and faster with your brush than the color underneath it. So you have to be kind of careful when you do it. But that's kind of how you pull that up. And then the masking fluid, you can either use your finger or the rubber pickup, and we're going to be removing it that way. So a little bit different in how we remove, but I'll show you that. And then Oxgall, yeah, that one's not really used too much. So that one you would, I think usually when I use it, I put a little bit into the water that I'm using, and it's supposed to like make water wetter. So it's really great for getting like nice even washes. Whereas gum arabic, I would say the great benefit of gum arabic is being able to layer over something that's already dry, because you can get really nice, like transparent, like deep kind of colors. So I can kind of show you a couple different things with gum arabic here. So this here is using gum arabic as a wet into wet. So it can be really nice for kind of like doing reflections. So I'll show you that. So what I would do is, if I want to do, here, I'll do the top part of it first. So maybe say I have some trees here. Blue trees, I guess. So, you know, as we're just painting straight with water and color, we're going to get a really hard edge, right? So then for wet into wet, we would want to put water down first. So I'm still going to start with water, even though I'm going to end up using some gum arabic. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take clean water. I'm going to leave a little space because I want, you know, how sometimes there's like a little bit of like a highlight or like a light in between where like a reflection, like if trees or something is reflecting into water, there's going to be like a little bit of a space there. So I'm going to use a little space there. And then I'm just going to kind of make like a little, I don't want to use too much water. I might have put down too much water here. So you want to use, I don't want it to like flow too much. Because then like, you know, like if you have too much water in a wet into wet, everything goes like really crazy, which can be cool for some things, but I want a little bit more control here. So if I was just to drop water into this, it wouldn't be very controlled. So the color would just kind of go everywhere, and I wouldn't really be able to get like a pattern or like a look of the trees as easily. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the gum arabic and I'm going to put it just at the top of here. So I don't need to put it through the whole thing, but mostly just kind of dropping it in at the top of where I put the water down. And then I'm going to take that color, and similar to how you would do a wet into wet, I'm going to drop the color in and kind of mimic the trees there. And what you're going to see is I'm going to have like, it's going to be a little bit more controlled and move a little bit more slowly. It's also going to dry a little bit slower too. So you'll have a little bit more time to manipulate it. So I think one of the coolest effects that you can get from gum arabic is getting like a really like cool looking reflection in a painting. Also, you know, you get these like really like interesting, like even for abstract work, really interesting kind of feathered edges that you don't get from a regular wet into wet. So I'm going to set that to the side, and I'm going to show you one more thing with gum arabic, but I think that since our first project we were working on is dry and ready to go, let's do the next layer on that, and then I'll come back to showing you more things with the gum arabic. So I'm just going to double check, make sure, maybe it's still not totally dry. Okay, I am going to leave it just a little bit longer. So let's keep going with the gum arabic. Yeah, if the masking fluid isn't totally dry when you paint over top of it, you can like accidentally lift it when you're painting over it. So you want to make sure it's as dry as it can be. And I'll hold this up a little bit closer to the camera so you can kind of see what's happening as the edges kind of start to get that really interesting feathering texture. So it really reproduces the look of a reflection quite nicely. And I would do this like not on an angle, like on a flat surface. So any kind of like wet into wet or similar to a wet into wet technique, you want to have your board flat or as flat as possible. Otherwise, everything will just kind of start to drip down. So another great use of gum arabic is going to be glazing. So this is another just kind of like I made like a little sheet of doodles, and you can kind of do this as well. Because this is where like you're going to be able to, like if you want to like make cards or bookmarks or anything, sometimes it's fun just to kind of like do like little designs and doodles and whatever with the masking fluid, and then go over top of it with some washes or brush strokes. Like in here I did some dry brush. Over here I kind of like splattered the masking fluid a little bit more. So I'm actually like taking the masking fluid and sort of like flicking it onto the paper or letting it drip onto the paper. If you're doing that, you have to let it dry quite a while before, or use a blow dryer to. So I'll be cutting this up and kind of making it into like either like maybe like a postcard, or some of them like you can kind of see where I drew lines where maybe I'll make them into like a bookmark or something. But sometimes it's nice just to have like a big sheet, do a bunch of things, and then look for the sections that you think are really cool for whatever you're making. But on here, why don't I just use this to show some glazing too. So maybe I'll go over an area that I'm not like, you know, kind of whatever about. So maybe I'll glaze some yellow over top of here. So what I would do is I could either put down a little bit of gum arabic first. And gum arabic's going to make the surface a little bit shiny, which can be really nice for some paintings too, but just to know that it's going to change the sheen of the painting. I can also mix a little bit of gum arabic and water at the same time into my palette on the side here. And I'll just kind of show you how I have my palette here. So this is actually a palette that I made. And it's just ceramic. So I'm just taking a little bit of the paint, a little bit of water, and a little bit of gum arabic and making a more transparent color with it. And then coming over to here. And I can get a really nice rich glaze or layering over top. You know, you still like, you know, when you're doing anything wet over top of watercolor, there's going to be the possibility that you could disrupt the surface underneath. So you want to be really careful while you're doing this. But the gum arabic is going to disrupt it a little bit less than just like putting a bunch of water down. And the color that you're going to get by overlapping, like see how I'm getting kind of more of like a bright orange color where I'm overlapping with the gum arabic and the yellow. That color is going to be more rich when you're layering with the gum arabic than if you're just using the regular water with the glazing or layering. And I can try that with a different color here too. So maybe I'll do the same thing, but with some blue. So you can see where it's overlapping that red color. We're getting more of a purpley color. So if anybody does like a lot of acrylic or oil painting, you'll like recognize this technique. So glazing is used a lot with those types of mediums. And then if you don't use enough, then you know you're probably not going to get the transparency that you want. So I put a little bit too much on there and I just kind of covered it. So you want to make sure that it's diluted enough. And then the other interesting thing is because I have the masking fluid down there, you can see like how it's not totally covering the masking fluid, which is really interesting. So you could get these with using the masking fluid plus this kind of layering technique, you can get a lot of depth, as you can imagine. And you can kind of see like if I tilt the paper like that, the kind of sheen that you're able to get from the gum arabic as well. So does that kind of answer some of the question about like ways that you can use the gum arabic? Another way that you could do it is just if you wanted to give an area a little bit more of a sheen. So up here, I could just take the gum arabic, and you don't want to get too much on there, but you could lightly paint it over an area just to give it a little bit of a glossy kind of sheen. Okay, great. So let's go back to the main one here. So that seems okay. So I'm going to use, I don't know, I think I'll probably just use yellow and blue again and kind of go for that Northern Lights kind of look. So you kind of want to mix up a little bit of color first. So if you have like a, you know, either kind of tray with like divots, that works really well. And then you can just like kind of make like a slightly diluted, more watery version of the color, because we're going to drop it in to the area. But first, what you're going to do is put water down over the surface. And you can see that I'm using the tip of the brush to really carefully outline the circle there. Because if the water doesn't travel over the edge of the circle, that means the paint won't either. Because science, I guess. So I'm just being really careful not to go over the edge of my pencil line with the water, because I don't really want my color to go over the edge. And then just making sure you're getting it into all the little divots in there as well. And then if you have any like kind of really puddly areas, try to soak them up with a dry brush. You don't want the paper to be too wet or too dry. So kind of right in the middle. So just kind of a nice thin, even coat of water over the whole thing. So just kind of trying to find any areas that you might have missed. I would use just try only water for this one. You could, if you want to experiment, try dropping some gum arabic into it if you want like kind of a an interesting, effect. You could also try dropping salt in if you have some table salt laying around, because that can also give you kind of an interesting texture. Like I think I used salt in the wet into wet and maybe one of this area up here. So you can get kind of like interesting textures by doing that. But if you want to just try like a traditional wet into wet, don't put anything in it. If you want to try using gum arabic, I would drop a little bit in now at this point. But I'm just going to do just a regular wet into wet. So I'm just taking my mixture of yellow and water, or you could even, if you wanted to experiment with gum arabic in your mixture of color, you could put a little bit of gum arabic into that. So then I'm just going to drop that in, and you'll notice that it's going to kind of, and in some areas I might be adding some water if I want it to be a little bit lighter or less intense. And you can do this like super randomly. And again, as long as you didn't go over the edge with your water, your color shouldn't travel over that edge either. So I'm going to leave it at that much for the yellow, and I can always come back and do more. So cleaning off my brush totally and completely, and then I'm taking some of the Winsor blue that I have. And then we're going to see that it's in, as it touches the yellow, it's going to start making more of a green kind of color. Where I didn't have any yellow down, it's going to stay more blue. And I'm working a little bit quickly just because, I don't want the paper to dry. If it is starting to dry, just add a little bit of water in an area. It could be nice to have some areas stay a little bit light. So in some areas, maybe I'll add, a little bit more water into there. Oops. And if you're like me and you like accidentally get some paint on the outside, you can just like, I'll show you how to take it off. Watercolor is usually pretty easy. Of course, I spilled like the most staining color over there, but it should still pick up okay. And then you can kind of decide like if some areas need like a little bit more of an intense color in there. So darker or lighter. If you want to pull back color and make it lighter, just clean off your brush and then dry it and then come back in with a dry brush, and you can kind of pull back color if you went too intense anywhere. So you can always kind of come back and you'll be able to manipulate the surface quite a bit until it dries. If you're using gum arabic, you're going to have, you know, quite a while to be able to manipulate the surface because it's going to slow the drying time down quite a bit. And then the other thing I'm doing is because I want this to dry, like, so that I can take off the masking fluid sooner than later. I'm actually not wanting it to pool quite, like, I think it would look better if I let it pool a little bit more, but I do want it to dry on the quicker side. So I'm actually gonna take out some of those like excess pools of water and color. You know, and obviously I'm doing this quite quickly, so you can, you know, take your time with it. You don't have to go as fast as I'm going with it. So I think I'm pretty happy with how the wet into wet is flowing there. And then, yeah, if you have little kind of splatters like I did, I would just kind of go like that and pull them up with a paper towel. And then if you want to lift a little bit, I'm not going to worry about it too much, but you could take just like a clean brush and just kind of scrub until the color lifts off, and then just kind of lift it a little bit with a paper towel. And you can even wait till it's dry before you do that, because watercolor is resoluble again. So I'm going to put that to the side and then come back to the gum arabic a little bit. And then once this is dry, we'll remove the masking fluid. And then these little circles here, I think they're going to be dry enough to go over top of them. So let's go ahead and do that too. So this is the regular masking fluid on this side. So you can kind of see where it's resisting there. And then on the other side, I have the gum arabic, which isn't maybe as dry as I want it to be, but I'm just going to be really careful when I go over top of it. You can kind of see it resisting, but it's a little bit harder to see where you put it than with the masking fluid. Okay, and then I'm going to let those two dry as well, and then I'll show you how to lift those. And that, you know, these ones should dry pretty quickly. And then as you guys have questions, you know, feel free to ask. I'm just like kind of looking at the comments as we go along. And then as we get to the end here, we'll let people go off mute and ask questions as well. You know, the other thing I didn't mention that I generally like to do before I use a color is test it. And this can also make a cool bookmark if you like keep a tester strip. I don't know if anybody like already kind of does this. So if you want to like check to see like how intense or what kind of color you made. So like maybe I'll just make a green here. And if I want to check to see what it looks like, I can just do one stroke like that, clean off the brush, dry it on a paper towel, and then you want to pick up that little drippy edge there. So then that'll give you an idea of what the color will look like when you use it. So that's something I really like to do when I'm watercolor painting. And it also, like, if you're trying to figure out like what kind of color scheme you want, it can be really helpful for that too. So basically you can end up with a like a tester strip that has like a whole bunch of different stripes of colors. And then I like to use them as bookmarks because they usually look really cool. So then with this one I did here, I'm just gonna kind of divide it up and see what I can make with it. Like, I'm thinking I really want to use like this side as like a card. So I made a line with a ruler and a pencil, and I'm just gonna cut it. You could use, if you want a really nice straight line, I would use an X-Acto knife. I'm just gonna use scissors though. So again, this is the one where I kind of splattered the masking fluid and dripped it to get this kind of effect. And then I did like different types of like wet into wet, also some dry brush. I put a little bit of salt in there in some areas. So I got a lot of different kind of abstract watercolor techniques going on in this one. And now I'm kind of like, do I want to like just fold it to make a card maybe? Or do I want to make it more like a postcard? So you can kind of think about that. So I'll think about like where I want to trim it, if I want to like just fold it in half, or if I really like this section. So I'm going to think about that a little bit. I think I might fold it. And I can always trim this later just to like make it look more perfect. But and then you could always do like use this as a base and then do like writing over top of the over top of whatever like texture you have on there or whatever paint you put on. So if I wanted to write like happy birthday or happy Father's Day or whatever on this card, then I could kind of do that over top of this, or kind of wherever I wanted to. And then I'm probably, this is from a block, so it has like a little bit of an edge on it. So I'm probably going to trim the edge a little bit on all sides. But I like the way that looks cool. So that's just kind of one idea that you can do if you have something, like if you tried, doing a bunch of different things on one page that you can do. And then this one here, I've divided it up, and I think I'll maybe make bookmarks out of part of this. So I'm going to cut. So basically I just like ahead of time kind of figured out which sections were my favorite. And then I'm selecting just parts of it. Yeah, I'm going to show how to, basically you have to wait until your painting is, the watercolor part is dry before you remove the masking fluid. So it looks like maybe on one of them I'm almost dry. So we'll remove. And if yours, like, it depends how much water and paint you used. So if by the end of the demo yours isn't dry yet, you can always just wait a little bit longer, or use a hair dryer and then remove it after the demo's finished. But I think mine will probably just be dry in a couple minutes here. So, and then I'm gonna trim maybe some of the white edges off of this too. So I want to leave a little bit of the white, but Someone asked if you can use the back of the watercolor paper. I mean, in theory, you could. It's just, a lot of watercolor paper is sized and pressed in a way that the top of the surface is what's meant to be painted on. But, certainly like you could try it and see what it looks like. But the way the sizing on paper is done and the way it goes through either a roller or is pressed down is going to be it will have a specific side that you're supposed to use to paint on. And that's usually the side that has like a little bit more texture to it. So if you're not sure which side is the front, if you have like a sheet of paper, usually like the texture will go kind of like a bump like that, and you'll be able to feel it. And then on the back side, the divots will kind of go in and it'll be a little bit smoother. So that's one there. So that looks kind of cool. Like that. And then I can also, I think I want this one too. So basically when I was doing the designs on here, I was just kind of like doing whatever design came to my head. And I wasn't really doing anything in particular. And then, some parts of it I like and some parts of it I don't like that much, but then you can just kind of select out which parts you think are cool. And then, these can be kind of a fun gift to give people. Like you can laminate them and then give them as little gifts to people to use as bookmarks, or even not, I often will just use them as bookmarks and just as they are. Okay, so I think we should be dry enough here. Still a little bit wet, but I'm going to do it anyway. So when we're removing the masking fluid, you could use your finger just to pull it off. I'm going to use a rubber pickup. If it's something that's really precious, you will want to not use your fingers because your fingers have oil on them. But it doesn't really matter too much. Since this is still wet, I'm actually just going to kind of blot off some of the excess there so I can take that part off. So this is just the regular masking fluid here. So I'm just pulling that off. And then you'll see that you get like a really hard masked off edge there. This one has the gum arabic. So for the gum arabic, I'm going to take a brush and a clean paper towel, because I have a paper towel here, but it has a lot of blue and other colors on it. So I'm just going to kind of rub the surface like this. And so I want just so we can kind of see that the gum arabic is lifting easier than the paint. So we're starting to be able to remove that circle without removing the other color. And so what you're going to see is it's getting the edge is still masked, but it's a much softer edge. So comparing those two there. So this is masking with gum arabic, and that's masking with the masking fluid. So it just kind of depends on what kind of effect you want to have. So both can be really interesting ways to mask out an area. So then coming back to this one here, I would say, wait a little bit longer for yours to dry. Maybe what I'll do is, while mine's still drying a little bit, we can take questions, and I'll kind of remove it as we're taking any last questions, because I want to make sure that I'm leaving enough time for anybody to ask ask any kind of like questions if they want to come off mute or if you want to put them in the chat, either way. And I'm going to kind of just scroll up through the chat just to make sure I didn't miss anything, but does anybody have any kind of like last questions as we're waiting for the last little bit to dry here? Oh yeah, it looks like Lynn has a question there.
So I was wondering about Winsor and Newton colors in general. I recently got one of the dot cards and was going through it to see which ones I liked. And it seemed like every time I'd hit a color, I was like, ooh, I've got to get that one to add. It was always ones that were like Winsor orange or Winsor blue. Is there some special, like, you know, the Winsor ones, are they some special line or approach to like making the pigments or something?
No, it's just, that's all branding. So
Okay.
I'll give you a tip. So if you look on the backs of the tube, like let me find one. Yeah, so here I kind of had talked about this one earlier. So this one is phthalo blue. My tube is a little twisted here, but so this one is called Winsor blue. But if I look at the back of it, it has what's called a pigment indexing number on the back of it. So it says pigment PB15, kind of right here. You'll be able to find that on the backs of all your tubes. So that is the indexing number for phthalo blue. Winsor Newton brands it as Winsor blue, but it's actually just like a very typical color. So probably, so all the colors that you have that are called Winsor, they're actually probably not an uncommon color. So if you look up that indexing number, it will tell you what that pigment is, and it probably will match, like if you do acrylic painting or oil painting, it will match to the other colors that you're used to using. It's just a branding thing.
Okay, thanks very much.
And
Appreciate it.
there's websites that have a list of the indexing numbers and what different brands call them too, which can be really helpful because it can get a little bit confusing, but that's like the best tip I can give you is look at that indexing number and then you can just Google it and it will tell you what other names that color goes by. But essentially what all the companies are going to be using the same indexing numbers. So you can always just look it up and then you can find out what other ones it's similar to. So another company might be using PB15 and calling it phthalo blue. And it's going to be essentially, they'll probably look a little bit different because everyone makes paint differently, but essentially it's going to be the same color. Is that helpful?
Sounds great. Thank you.
Okay,
I appreciate it.
Yeah. Anybody else have any questions?
With regard to the colors, the Winsor blue green shade is what you were using today, which is like a phthalo, correct?
Yes, yeah. So both of them are so the colors that I would be using, so this one right here would be phthalo blue shade, but they call it Winsor, they call it Winsor blue, or sorry, red. It would be Winsor blue red shade, also known as phthalo blue red shade.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So the Winsor blue green shade, what would that be equivalent to?
They both are PB15. It's just a slight difference in the way but the indexing number is still PB15 on both. It's just one looks a little bit more like towards purple and one looks a little bit more towards green.
Oh, okay.
But essentially it's the same color. It's just they go like a little bit different direction in their temperature.
And with the yellows, I've always used Aureolin. Would either of those yellows be reasonably equivalent to Aureolin?
Is that one, I don't know if I don't use that one too much. Is that one more of like an orangey yellow or more of a
It's a pretty clear yellow.
Yeah.
I'm looking up the number on it. Let's see. I always have trouble finding them because they're so small.
Yeah.
Because Aureolin is fairly similar to Hansa.
You know what, you could also, if you want to message me, I can I'll put my email
Oh,
in here.
PY40?
PY40. Okay. Yeah, why don't you, I'm not like totally sure about that one, but I'll put my email in here. And you can always send me your question and I can get back to you on
Oh,
it.
okay.
Kristen, can you bring back that sheet with all the colors from the beginning? The yellow, blue.
Oh,
and
right. That's
red?
right. That's right. We were going to go through the recommended color palette again. Thank you for reminding me.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, so that's my email there. So if anybody has any technical questions, and Donna, definitely send me that one because I can, I'll be able to look if I have the indexing numbers and everything,
Oh,
and the,
okay.
you know, the color palette or whatever color sheet in front of me, I'll be able to answer your question a little bit better. I
Thank
just don't have it in front of me right now. Yeah, so for the recommended palette from Winsor Newton, you know, obviously you don't have to use this, especially if you already kind of have a palette that you like, but can be really helpful if you're just kind of starting off and you want to be able to get a nice full range of color. This is what they recommend. So we have the French ultramarine. And then did you guys want me to put this into the chat too? And then you can copy and paste it out. Maybe I'll do that.
I'm typing it right now. You don't have to type it.
Oh, you're typing it? Oh, great.
Yeah.
Thank you. So French ultramarine, Winsor blue green shade. So this is for the 6 color palette. Permanent rose, Scarlet Lake, Winsor lemon, and Winsor yellow. So again, you're just kind of getting a warm and cool of each primary color in this case. And then if you want to, if you're just starting off and you just want to try watercolor and you don't want to invest as much as 6 colors, you could do 3 colors and still get a pretty nice range of color. So that would be Winsor lemon, permanent rose, and Winsor blue red shade in the case of the 3 color palette. And so the difference between the red shade and the blue shade is not a whole lot. It's just, so I used red shade here. This is the green shade here. This one's just varying a little bit closer to green. The other one's going a little closer to purple, but they look quite similar to each other. Cool. I'm hoping that I'm dry enough here. Again, you know, I would let yours dry a little bit longer than I'm letting mine dry, but I do want to kind of remove mine now. So why don't I just go like that? So this is where like a hair dryer is really helpful in just kind of like speeding up if you're using like a lot of water or color there. So we can kind of start, so you can kind of see where the stars are pulling up here. And again, mine's not like as dry as I would love it to be. And then, you know, sometimes you can just kind of pull it. You just want to be really careful if you're doing it like that.
Can you give us your email address again, Kristen?
Yeah.
I thought I'd written it down and can't find it.
Yeah. I'm just going to put it into the chat again. Okay. Oh, actually, you know what?
Oh, there it is.
Yeah, it's in there now. Yeah. Thank you. So we can see with the masking fluid, we just get a really nice hard edge there. And then once I remove all of that, it's actually really fun to take off the masking fluid. Then depending on how, you know, I did the colors really light on this one. I haven't fully removed all the masking fluid yet, but you can kind of get a sense of what it looks like when all the masking fluid is removed. This would be like with a darker color combination here. And this could also be really nice to, you know, we could cut this out and use that on a card as well. So even if you accidentally, like, you know, I think sometimes it's easy to accidentally go over the lines or whatever, you could also just cut it out into a circle and paste it onto a card or anything like that. Or you could, like, I feel like this would be a nice project to just like frame and put in a room kind of thing.
Sounds good.
Great. And then there's a, if just so everybody kind of knows, there's like a link to where the demo is going to be reposted. So if you want to go back to reference anything, you can check it out there. Was there any other questions that anybody had?
Great, thank you.
It was very informative.
Good,
Yeah.
I'm so glad.
I liked it.
Okay, great. Well, I guess that's gonna wrap it up then. So thank you, Kristen, for leading this demo. It was awesome. And everyone look out in your email later. Allie will be emailing you with a coupon to use on some of the Winsor Newton watercolors.
Ooh, good.
Ooh, awesome.
Thank you very much.
Of course, everybody have a great weekend.
Have a good
You
weekend.
too.
Stay safe.
Well, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.